Well, it's a great honour to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. And he asked me to talk about TRIZ and complex systems, which is a big theme of our work and has been for the last 2 or 3 years now. And when I say we, I mean the research team. So my organisation, we are 40 people. 20 of them are researchers. They spend all of their time studying why it's so difficult to innovate. Other 20 are working with clients, helping to deliver and create solutions. So these are some of the companies we get to work with. And I think it's fair to say that they are all finding innovation difficult. And there are 2 common themes that I see and hear when I go to these organizations. Number 1, the better the organization is at operational excellence, in other words, doing the continuous improvement work, the worse they are at innovation. And that's a horrible conflict for businesses to manage. Number 2, they are stuck in silos. And when TRIZ comes along and says someone somewhere has solved your problem, then the big idea very often is the someone is in a different industry. And so the skills to look in other industries are really not there for the most part in the way that people have been educated, certainly in the West. So what do we see? When we look at performance in those organizations and innovation opportunities. So this is a survey that Gartner do every year, and again, this is mainly Western organizations, but how many people enjoy their work? Well, answer, 74% of people do not enjoy their work. Yeah, that is an enormous amount of waste inside organizations. Yeah, and how do we tackle that kind of problem? This is coming from the world of Lean and Six Sigma, but particularly Lean, and a British researcher called John Seddon who talks about failure demand inside organizations. So failure demand is how much work is done that is only being done because we didn't get it right the first time. So somebody made a mistake, and then somebody had to follow up and solve the problems caused by the mistake. Almost 2/3 of all the work inside organizations is failure demand. That's an incredible amount of waste inside organizations. Then we get to somewhere closer to the traditional TRIZ territory, the world of intellectual property. 97% of intellectual property generates no tangible value at all. And that's probably the biggest waste of all. Now, in my mind, and what I tell my clients is that what TRIZ has done for us is helped us to be much better at focusing on and targeting the 3%. Yeah, what TRIZ has done for us is given us a way to distill innovation down to first principles and understand the core of invention. Okay, now let's bring a few more things together. This is data that one of the big 5 consulting companies publishes every year, and each of these represents a company. This axis is how much did we spend on research and development. That's percentage, effectively, of turnover. And this axis is what the impact of that spend. Did the company grow? Did the company shrink? And honestly, we see a lot of bullshit here, especially this line here, and this mathematics is absolute nonsense, because one of the mistakes that's made with this kind of data is looking for the average. Okay? On average, this data tells us that if you spend money on innovation, if you spend even a tiny amount, you'll get something, but if you spend much more, you won't get much more better value. When I talk to CEOs of companies, and we talk about this kind of data, and we talk about innovation teams, they do not trust the innovation teams at all. I spend money with my innovators and nothing ever comes back, is the message that I hear from the senior leadership teams inside organizations. So main job of my research team is to say, let's have a look at these organizations. What did these companies do? Is this random, or is there methodology behind the companies that are successful? So my version of business triz is that kind of research, trying to unravel what did successful companies do that the other companies did not do. And what we find overall is 98% of all innovation attempts end in failure. Whether that's technical innovation, business innovation, IT innovation, innovation in music, innovation in literature, that number seems to be pretty much constant. So then let's zoom in. Here's where things get a little bit depressing. 98% of all TRIZ-related innovation attempts end in failure. 98% of all design thinking attempts end in failure. Name pretty much any methodology, and it has no impact at all on the rate of success of the innovation attempt. The only one where we can see a significant difference is if your organization embarks upon an open innovation initiative, you are much more likely to fail. 4 times more likely to fail. So something's going wrong here. Yeah, again, an incredible amount of waste inside organizations. And our job, when I talk about business triz and the research, is what did the 2% do that the 98% did not do? Well, clearly some companies are very successful. So this is the American NASDAQ index, and you've now got this big 5 and everybody else. You've got Apple, you've got Amazon, you've got Google, you've got Microsoft, you've got Facebook, and everybody else. Now, in those companies there, we've probably spent and probably done 2 weeks worth of TRIZ in total. Those are not TRIZ companies. Yeah. They found a way of being successful, and very often by accident. Our job has been to try and unravel and understand what is it that's allowed these companies who 10, 15 years ago barely existed at all to be incredibly dominant. Before I do that, I think there's confusion over the word innovation. So I tend to use this picture quite a lot. Here are a number of technical solutions, shall we say, attempts to innovate. How many innovations do you think you can see? How many innovations can you see? 0? 0. Does anybody have a different answer? 11? All of them, okay. Oh, good, good. So we've got a range from 0 to 18, which I think immediately tells me we have a problem with the definition of the word innovation. So according to the criteria that we use, I believe that there are 2 innovations on that picture. So the definition I use has 2 parts to it. Part 1 of innovation is, was there a step change? So if you think about discontinuity, so the step change here was it was the first intelligent toy. It had a learning algorithm in the software. This is what I was involved in, and the innovation here is this fluted nacelle at the back of the engine. Now I think what we can learn from this one, what I learned from this one was the patents for this, 1989. Rolls-Royce started making money from it 2017. Yeah, the patent had run out. And it's great that Rolls-Royce makes money from it, but GE, United Technologies, they can copy now exactly the same solution. Yeah. The potential for the advantage, for the real advantage, disappeared before Dreamliner came along. Innovation is a really cruel game. Yeah, and getting the timing part of the story right is incredibly difficult, and in many ways that's what we got wrong at Rolls-Royce. Let's come back here for a second. I don't know if anybody recognises this product here. This is Tata and the Nano. So Tata in India developed this car, the $1,000 car. And I think another lovely example of how cruel the innovation game is. So the second criteria number 1 is, was there a step change? Criteria number 2 is, was I successful? Okay. And as far as these companies are concerned, did I make money? That's the criteria that they will use for success. And literally that only Furby and the engine have made money. Everything else has lost money. This was a $1,000 car. Very, very disruptive. So the engineering in that vehicle, there's some incredible work there. The tiny mistake they made at the end of all the hard work was they went to the Indian market and told Indian consumers, this is the $1,000 car. This is the car in the world. And what they very quickly realized from customers is customers do not like to buy the cheapest car in the world. Because in India, owning a car is a very aspirational thing. And when it's something aspirational, cheap is not a good measure of whether I'm going to buy it. So what this actually ends up doing is opening up the market for the second cheapest car in the world. But really cruel, because all the hard work by the engineers was basically thrown away by the marketing people who did not understand the way that consumers think. Okay. We're talking about complex systems. So I hear this inside organizations all the time when it comes to change. We need to do something different. If we keep doing things the same, we'll get the same results. But if you look at the Fortune 500, 1955 when it was first published and today, over 400 of those companies have disappeared. Disappeared because they believed this. In a complex world, this makes no sense at all. And I think it becomes obvious why it makes no sense as soon as you think this. Can I also assume that everything around me is staying the same? Well, most of the companies I visit, they still believe that. But in a global economy, that cannot be true. Everything, everywhere is changing. So this becomes really dangerous inside an organization. We hear this: for every complex problem, there is a clear, simple, wrong answer. Well, let me come back to that in a second. Let's think about complex systems. So here's the challenge my research team has, but here's, I think, the challenge for any researcher trying to look at the world of business. This is what I call the business textbook. The majority of business textbooks are like this. So an author goes to a company, the company's been successful, the author interviews people and says, what were the important moments in the evolution of this business? And people are standing here and they look back and they look at what they think are the important situations and activities that took place. And then the author publishes a recipe book. Okay? If you want to be successful like Apple, this is what you do. If you want to be successful like Google, this is what you do. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Of course, any of you that have been involved in an innovation project knows that this is what an innovation project actually looks like. And unfortunately, you cannot ignore this stuff. The dead ends, the directions you went down where nothing worked, that was an important part of the process. In a complex environment, you cannot ignore that. Now, as I say, as a research team, we've got to try and unravel that in order to understand which of the failures were important in terms of developing the success. Okay, here's a complex system. What are the characteristics of a complex system? This is a formation of starlings. This one's close to my house. What we can find in this situation is beautiful formation. If we try and set up a computer program to predict the shape of this formation, it will fail very quickly. Because the relationship between cause and effect is very tenuous. What that means in a complex environment is I cannot hope to do a root cause analysis. In a complex system, there is no such thing as a root cause analysis. Any of you that follow British politics, I'm proud to say that Britain is the embarrassment of the world right now with Brexit, etc. There's been lots of analysis. What's the root cause of the Brexit issue? Well, it's the wrong question. It's an impossible question to answer. And as long as people keep asking it, we will never find a way forward. Something else we know about complex systems, I think we've all heard of the butterfly effect. Yeah? Tiny things, the flap of a butterfly wings in London creates a tornado in Minsk. You've got to look for weak signals. You can't ignore tiny stuff because that tiny stuff could easily expand and become the disruption that destroys your company. So an awful lot of rules behavior change. However, you do try and understand what's going on in something like this formation here. When you go and talk to the zoologists, when you watch the formation, there is no leader here. What you have is every bird has got the same instruction in their heads. Fly as close to your neighbor as possible. And that's it. That's the only rule in the system. All right. What I think that takes us to is for every complex problem, there are thousands and thousands of clear, simple, wrong answers. But there is the possibility of a clear, simple, right one if you understand how the system works at the first principle level. So again, the research team is really all about trying to distill things down to first principles. What does that mean? This is the work of Dave Snowden. Dave Snowden is an ex-IBM knowledge management person, and he pretty much spends his life these days talking to senior leaders and government officials around the planet about these different worlds or these different ways of looking at the world. So one said the world is chaotic. There's a world that's complex. So my starlings is a complex system. Sometimes you'll get a situation like this where this bird arrives. Falcons eat starlings. So as soon as the falcon arrives, you've got chaos. The rules, the behavior of the system has now changed. So the complex system can easily fall into chaos. Now, when we go to business and we look at companies, companies do not like chaos. Companies do not like complexity either. Companies like complicated and even better, obvious. So what companies try and do, and that's, I mean, the marketing people, the logistics people, in many ways the engineers, we try and understand what's going on. Yeah. Understanding allows us to build a world which is complicated. What I mean by complicated is, this example here is designing a railway timetable is a complicated problem. Designing a timetable for schools is a complicated problem. But if I've got a computer, then there's a good chance that I can make a railway timetable where the trains run on time. And I can design a school where the right children are in the right classroom with the right teacher at the right time. It's complicated. Even better, as far as organizations are concerned, I hear an awful lot about standardization. Okay, if we can standardize things, then we get great economy of scale. So this is a hospital. If you go to the hospital, if you go to the emergency room in the hospital, there's a triage process. Yeah, immediately you're assessed, 1, 2, 3, and once it's been decided, this will determine your pathway through the hospital. Now, great insight behind this picture, I think, is obvious, can easily fall into chaos. Yeah, and there are an awful lot of Western organizations right now that have designed their business to be here and not understood this boundary here. Yeah, and I think what Donald Trump, particularly Steve Bannon, is hoping is that lots of organizations will fall off this cliff here. Because one good thing about chaos is it creates lots of change. It gets rid of lots of dead wood and allows things to start again. And if you've spent any time in America will know there's an awful lot of dead wood there. Okay, it's a bit too depressing. Let's move on. I say management is trying to get systems over here and over here, but the reality is that the system is complex. All right, so here's my version of the picture. But I've got two dimensions now. I've got the external environment and then I've got the system. So in TRIZ terms, system, supersystem. And the supersystem can be simple, complicated, complex, chaotic. The system can be simple, complicated, complex, chaotic. As far as my system is concerned, I definitely don't want to be down here. Yeah, there's what I might call the collapse zone. That's a good way of getting my organisation to not work anymore. Here's the father of cybernetics. This is W. Ross Ashby. And his contribution to the world, I think, is those of you that are software engineers, only variety can absorb variety. So here's the Ashby line. What this says is, if I want my organisation to be successful, I need to have capability than the environment in which I'm operating. So a resilient business is one where there is more than enough capability to cope with variety. Okay, well, in theory that's easy. In practice, of course, it's really difficult. And it's really difficult in the West for, first of all, this person. Frederick Winslow has taught American business, standardization is good. Well, every time you standardize something, you're taking it out of that zone. The other thing that's difficult, of course, is globalization, but for those of you that are scientists, the second law of thermodynamics, entropy increases, things towards chaos or the edge of chaos. So the natural forces drag us out of that zone. There are things we can do to get back in. I'm not going to go into the details of this, it's too much for this presentation, but there are ways we can get back into this top corner of the picture, into this zone here. But what we do see at first principle level, which means for me that TRIZ sits right at the heart of what we do, is contradiction. Contradiction in business. The biggest contradiction in business is I need my operational excellence. The ideal final result of that is to make it as simple as possible. But I also need the ability to innovate. And what innovation means is I've got to be up in this complex domain. I need people who understand complex systems and understand the characteristics of designing solutions in a complex environment. Those are two very, very different places for a business to be. Okay. I often ask companies when I first visit them, where do you think your company is on this picture? And I have to say most of them put themselves here in this area here. There are very few resilient businesses on the planet. I think the most troublesome thing of all is that the stick to bear in mind is this one. If there are two human beings involved in the process, it is complex. I spend most of my time in hotels, but if I'm at home, my experience here is if I go to the supermarket with my wife, there is a complex system, very close to chaos. There's going to be an argument before we come home. If there are two human beings involved, it's a complex system, and that demands different ways of behaving. So what we've tried to do in terms of methodology is say, I need to bring along the right set of tools and the right practices depending on the situation that I'm in. So for me, classical TRIZ is a wonderful, very, very potent toolkit for complicated problems and people who understand complicated. Yeah. If I'm working with a team and it ends up being a technical problem, most technical problems are here. Yeah, those of you that have seen the current Boeing 737 MAX problems, that's a complicated software problem, but it's a complex people problem. Safety has been everything in the aerospace industry, and somehow we've now got managers who are running the business that do not understand that anymore. So finally, Cobra is intended to be a process for complex systems. If you get a chance to see my presentation tomorrow morning, I'm going to talk more about this process here, but the main character I would say of it, let me pick out three things. It starts with a compass. You need to know where you're heading. TRIZ tells us everything heads towards the ideal. Okay. That in itself is quite critical for most managers inside companies. This part here is all about buts. That's the contradictions. Go and find all the contradictions that are in your system. Find a way of managing them, look the resources, and then solve the contradiction. The next most important characteristic is it's a cycle. And it's a cycle that you may go through many times. Those of you that are involved in design thinking, I'm sure will eventually disappear, but what it leaves behind is this idea of, in a complex environment, you cannot know what the right answer is. What you've got to do is keep trying, and effectively do what this person taught us. So this is John Boyd. Think of somebody with an extreme problem, they've solved your problem. It's in his case, fighter pilot. The pilot that's the most successful is the one that learns the fastest. Thank you. Okay, let's just come back. I've just about got time to look at these things. So let me try and explain this stuff here. I think this book is a really good illustration of what is happening. And Kaffioli's probably a little bit biased, but I think what's happening in China is they've got to the DNA, the first principles, if you like, of what sits behind the success of these organizations. And what is at the root is another universal. First principles, the S-curve. What kicks the S-curve off is you need to find a virtuous cycle. And at the other end of the S-curve, what you need to look out for in a complex environment are the vicious cycles. And all these organizations, and going to China, Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, they've all understood this. The virtuous cycle of owning the data. If I own the data, then I can develop products faster. They will be better. The customers love them. The customers give me even more data, and I can create even better problems. They've created an incredible virtuous cycle, and from that, great success comes. Now, of course, what the S-curve also tells us is that can't go on forever. And if you look at Facebook today, I think we're just starting to see the vicious cycle that comes out of that. And so it may well turn out that the problem that sits at the heart of the Brexit issue right now, this vicious circle, is all about Facebook. Okay, final couple of thoughts. Now I think I've just about got time here. This is the operational excellence world, finally. This is the Schuhart cycle, a continuous improvement cycle. If I'm in operational excellence part of a business, in the West, they'll certainly be talking about this. What they've forgotten is that the area of each of these quadrants is supposed to relate to how much time each of these 4 activities should take. And I don't know about Belarus, but here's what I see in the UK and in the US. Companies spend very little time planning. We spend a couple of days thinking what the problem might be. We then go and implement the problem, then realize it was wrong. So the studies actually make sure I don't get blamed, make sure somebody else gets the blame, and we go into firefighting, which is very, very attractive to people. Whatever I say to my clients we need to spend more time here, no client is going to do that. No client is going to do that. But I think what we can do, and I think what is happening, is that we can help companies to understand that they are in a complex environment. We can understand the first principle behavior of those complex environments. You need to understand vicious cycles, virtuous cycles. From a TRIZ perspective, the compass, everything heads towards free, perfect, and now. And right at the heart of all of it is the contradiction idea. My job when I'm with clients is find the critical contradictions, help the companies to solve them, test something, try again, try again, try again. So with that, I'll say again, thank you very much for the invitation. And if anyone wants to read any books on, we try and split the world into understanding the customer, understanding the solutions, and understanding the ability of the organization to execute. So there's the books that we publish are basically in those 3 clusters. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrell. Thank you for a very wonderful and very interesting presentations indeed, because that's a very hard issue, which I personally face a lot in my consulting activities, dealing with complexity. Okay, the first question. Organizers, how do we have time? How much do we have? 1 minute? Okay. One question.
English?
Thank you for
English.
the report. I will answer in Russian. Можете переключить на слайд с линии Эшби, диаграммку, диаграмма с Эшби. Вот вопрос по этой диаграмме. Принцип необходимого разнообразия Эшби говорит о том, что система управления должна быть сложнее, чем объект управления. А здесь же у вас сравнивается, собственно, система и надсистема. У нас же система не занимается изменением надсистемы. То есть если у нас какая-то, есть система по решению задач, то ее объект обработки, собственно, наверное, задача или какой-то техпроцесс, над которым мы хотим выполнить какое-то действие. У нас же, наша организация, она же по определению менее сложная, чем надсистема. Прокомментируйте, пожалуйста.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. So let me give you an example of Ford. So you go back to the beginning of the automotive industry, 1929. So for a long while, Henry Ford is trying to establish a business. And the magic moment comes with the Model T Ford, and what we all hear today, any color you like, as long as it's black. So what he did, that as soon as he says any color you like, as long as it's black, as far as the super system is concerned, the customers, he's basically made the problem into a simple problem. Yeah. As soon as you say to the customer, this is an offer, it's a black car, buy it or don't buy it, you've made your world, your external environment, a very simple environment. Then along comes General Motors. General Motors says maybe the customer wants cars that are not black. What he did was took the automotive world into this complicated domain. Yeah, with the customer's choice, different brands, but I think the basic idea here is, let's come back to this picture that I jumped over. There are a number of things that companies can do in order to move things in this direction.
То есть я правильно понял, по оси X отложены задачи, которые дает надсистема.
Wait.
Да?
Hold on.
Once again.
То есть я правильно понял, что по оси X отложена задача, сложность задач, которая предъявляет надсистема к бизнесу. Да?
I think the simplest thing about it is his customer.
Customer. То есть задачи клиентов, да? The task of the customers.
It's what customers want. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Спасибо. We are slightly late, 15 minutes, so I propose that Mr. Darrell will be hanging around right here, so please do not hesitate, come and ask your questions during lunch or afterwards. Okay, Darrell, thank you very much. Thank you.